Excellent. Okay, today is July 20th. My name is Adolfo Romero, and today we're here on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and also as part of the Washington protests regarding police brutality. And this is an after interview with a family member. Could you please, Amity, could you please tell us your name and can you spell your last name and first name?
Hi, my name is Amity Dimock. That is AMITY Dimock.
All right, Amity, could you tell us a little bit about where are you from and a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yes, I personally currently live in northern Minnesota, so about 2 hours north of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. Grew up in Wisconsin, which is where I still have some family. And then in my early 20s, I married a gentleman named Jason Heisler, who was from Brooklyn Center. And most of that family is there. And that is also where my son lived and where the incident happened at that Brooklyn Center home.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about your son and what is his name and what happened?
Yes, my son's name was Kobe Heisler, legally Kobe Dimock Heisler, but he went by Kobe Heisler. He was 21 years old. He was a 21-year-old autistic person. He had just graduated high school, or he hadn't just graduated high school. He had graduated high school and was enrolled in chef programs at Dunwoody, or I can't even remember what college it was. And he lived with his grandparents in Brooklyn Center. Well, it went between grandparents and then his father and stepmother, who also lived north Minneapolis. He was a wonderful, wonderful boy. He was a big boy, right? So I like to call him my gentle giant. He was at least a full head taller than me. So when he stood over me, he could just put his head like that. His head would be on top of my head. So, and he just gave the best hugs ever. I could just like get right up in there. And there's just something about that stature of his. Unfortunately, that stature of his also probably, I know, the police used as an excuse. He's such a big man. No, he was a tall man. He was in no way, shape, or form a large man, and not physically fit or anything. He was like a lot of kids these days, where what he liked to do was stare at his phone and computer and game and Nintendo Switch and Google whatever. It was pretty interesting when I got his computer. He had, you can have tabs open at one time. Dude, there were probably like 50 or 75 tabs open all at the same time. And half of them were podcasts. He liked reading and listening to those sorts of things. Like Night Vale was one of his favorites. But then funnily, the other thing that he had open was hard candies, right? Like he liked the idea of homemade hard candies. I remember one Christmas, because I'm a lazy mother. What do you want for Christmas, right? So they'd give me a list. And one year his list was like these hard candies that you would get from other countries, right? So go figure, you never know what's going through the brain of a person. So he was really into artistic stuff. Like I say, going to school to be a chef. He crocheted. We crocheted together. He crocheted blankets. One of the things that we found after he was murdered was a blanket. He was in the middle of crocheting, and it was in Brooklyn Center. They didn't really know what it was, but I knew exactly what it was. I said, that's the blanket he started crocheting for his cousin, Ethan. So I said, give it to me. I took it, I finished it, and then I presented it to the cousin. He liked to cross stitch, needlepoint, and one of his big things that he liked to do was to garden, including like hybriding new flowers. You can't see it here, but this is one of his hybrided flowers and an actual picture of them. And then we put it on my arm. Wow. But he called it the Kobe sunrise. So you've got yellow, like it got the yellow and then the pink in the leaves. He was pretty incredible that way. So the thought of him being perceived as a violent person is absurd to me. I mean, both my side of the family and his father's side of the family are non-violent people. I would even go so far as to say I'm not only just non-violent in theory, I'm non-violent in practice, but I mean, even my religion, Quakerism, just non-violent. We're non-violent people. My son did not have a violent bone in his body. He did not hurt anything. He'd never hurt anything. And in my son's case, people can't go back and say, well, this dude was a thug. He had this record. No, you know what? But it still doesn't matter. They still say, well, he didn't listen to the police. He deserved what happened to him. Nobody ever deserves that, first off. Well, maybe some people, but not my son, And so, yeah, he was just a wonderful, beautiful kid. He had a very strong relationship with his sister, my daughter, with my current husband, well, forever fiance, my current person. And then he had his little cousin, Ethan, who technically they were cousins, but they were so close, they called themselves brothers. And he was really into taking care of his grandparents, who are elderly at this point, both have a lot of physical issues. Grandpa's been through a lot, can kind of get around. Grandma's been through a lot, can't really get around. So did a lot of helping out. I had been trying to get him to move up here with us. And he said, yeah, I'll do that, Mom, at some point, but I got to finish taking care of Grandma and Grandpa. So, bless his heart. He was like, I'm not going until they're gone because they need me. And then you're disabled, you're next, but you're younger. So then he'll come help Mom out, but that was the type of person he was. Like I said, he was autistic and he had his moments, as family members, we've dealt with this for all 21 years. But as far as hurting somebody else, that wasn't ever our fear. Our fear was him hurting himself, which he had done 5 months previous. And without saying too much, right now, I can tell you much more later, but the officers were aware of that, his self-inflicted stabbing that had happened 5 months previous. So, and just had a bad day that day. And as a result, ended up murdered in his own home in front of his grandmother, put down like an animal.
Could you tell me how it led to that point? What happened during that day, or how did it get to that point? From
what's out there right now, they had the grandfather and my son had gone to run some errands that day. The grandparents had company for like a few weeks. And so this was kind of their first time to be available, and they were going to go do something later on in the afternoon. And Kobe was like, no, let's go do this right now. And they were like, you know what, you're right. We haven't had time for you, so let's go do this. So Grandpa and Kobe went to the store to get groceries and, run your typical errands. They also went and got, like I say, he's into his plants. So they went and got a bunch of succulents that day, which I now have, and I'm trying to keep alive because succulents are not the easiest thing to do if you don't know what you're doing. And then they went to Wendy's. And yes, Wendy's, I'm sorry, but I will never eat at Wendy's again. This Wendy's had the habit of messing up their orders, right? Regularly. So while Grandpa and Kobe were, pulling away or just got their food, Kobe wanted to check, make sure they got their order correct because they thought the order would be messed up. Grandpa just wanted to get home. So that's what made him upset. It was that Grandpa didn't want to take the time to check to make sure that the food was correct, which the food ended up not being correct. And so, he got upset and they got into an argument, and this Wendy's was only 6-7 blocks from their house. Kobe jumped out of the car, and so Grandpa just kept on going home, ate his food, and then was going to, turn around and go back and figure out where Kobe was. And instead, Kobe had come home. He was upset. He at some point he grabbed a hammer and a knife and was yelling at the grandfather to, can I swear? To fucking apologize, right? So he's just fucking apologize. And so, I have opinion on all that. I can't go much. I'll clarify in a follow-up interview. So grandfather called 911 out of concern. And as I say, concern for my son, not saying, oh my gosh, this kid's trying to hurt me. The grandpa went back out, everything was fine. He went back in, called 911, and by out and in, I just mean he has an office, like I'm sitting in an office right here. He's an older gentleman. He still uses a landline. If everyone's ever going to make a phone call, it's always in his office. So that's why he's going in and out. Goes back, calls 911, says, just forget about it. Kobe's going to be fine. No, we're going to be fine. Kobe's going to be fine. And I'm not even sure. I would assume they said, no, we're going to come anyhow, whatever. Either way, they ended up coming anyhow. And, I wish I could remember everything that's on the tapes that are available versus the tapes that we have, because I think that they put a portion of 4 of the officers' videos up there. But, I think we ended up with 44 videos and, full in length. And so they showed up, essentially said, we need to make sure everything is okay, which by all intents and purposes, everything was okay. And went in, searched my son. He completely complied. At about 12 minutes in, he got up to leave because he was just done with it. And that's that. He got up to leave and he ended up with 6 bullets in himself. Now, if you read the Hennepin County District Attorney report, these ludicrous ass motherfuckers actually go so far as to try to insinuate premeditation. He intentionally put this weapon here and he intentionally waited for the officers and then he intentionally did that. Literally the most ludicrous thing I have ever heard. But one of the reasons that I do interviews like this, every time I do something like this, it's a risk, right? But you cannot go tell the world that my son was a premeditated, was planning on hurting police. That's the most ludicrous thing I have ever heard in my life. And quite honestly, if those people who wrote that were in front of me, I would punch them in the face. I mean, I wouldn't, but in my brain, I would, I mean, just very, very hurtful, very, to me, it seems like defamation of character. I mean, I'm an accountant, not an attorney, but, I mean, just gross what they do to explain away what they've done. Say what you think happened, but don't even try to infer premeditation. That's insulting. And so that's it. They came in, they had the grandfather outside talking with him. They left the grandmother on the couch. They searched and questioned my son, put him on a chair in the middle of the room.
Okay. So at this point, has anyone been held accountable for what happened within the precinct or any of the officers, anyone?
Nobody has been held accountable. The Hennepin County District Attorney's Office, Mike Freeman's office, chose not to prosecute, which is, generally what 98% of our families get. They're just not going to charge. And so that's just that.
Okay. And I guess after all this now, how long has it been going on at this point? How long have you been going on through this process right now? About
2 years, 10 and a half months. So currently August 31st of 2022 will be the 3-year statute of limitations for filing a claim for wrongful death.
And what do you think will happen afterwards, after the 3rd-year mark? What are your expectations to happen, and what do you think will happen if you guys get past the 3-year mark? What's the next steps? Or
If you get past the 3-year mark, you're SOL.
Okay.
I mean, it's like literally midnight, August 31st.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's that. Myself and the other impacted families from Minneapolis, or from the metro, from Minnesota, have been fighting to challenge the statute of limitations.
Okay. And
not that we're going to get it open-ended, but, you know, when they do things like make you wait a year to even get the videos, you know, I mean, when they're making you wait a year or two to even get the information to know what to do, you can't then say that there's a 3-year statute, right? So we are very actively trying to push that statute out just to give these families a fighting chance. And yeah, well, we got lots of bills we're working on. Also got a Kobe's Law, which would, because in our case, we didn't get any of the videos until almost a year. And at that point, we only got the videos. And by God, I mean, we didn't even get them. The family was allowed to finally view them, but only 4 days after George Floyd got murdered and the uprising started. So if it hadn't have been for George Floyd, we would have still been waiting. But the mayor of Brooklyn Center right away was like, you guys want to see him now? I'm sure hoping that what was happening in Minneapolis didn't come and happen in Brooklyn Center. But, you know, of course, their police force went right ahead a year later and murdered Dante Wright, and they got it anyhow. And Brooklyn Center is one, I told you, 2 police involved deaths happened in the last few days. Brooklyn Center was once again the other one. This time they pursued a high-speed car chase, which is yet another thing we're trying to challenge. For this exact reason, they hit an unrelated car. We now have a 6-year-old who died and a 15-year-old whose status I'm not sure, but was critical in the hospital.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you for your leadership that you've been taking on this. I know it's been hard for you and your family. I can't even imagine what you guys are going through. But can you tell me a little bit about those? How has this impacted just your family overall, the well-being of your family?
It's I don't know. It's hard to explain. For the first 9 months for myself personally, I didn't get out of bed. 2.5 years later, I am now feeling that financially, because during that time frame, I put everything on credit cards. Now I'm to the point where my credit cards are maxed and I'm paying interest and can barely keep up with the interest. And, 5 weeks ago, I went to meet with a bankruptcy attorney. Why am I in this position? Everything was fine prior. Everything was fine. And then when I did finally get up out of bed after 9 months, George Floyd happened. And it's like, you know what? We got a problem here. And like I say, I live 2 hours up north. The next thing you know, we are driving back 4 or 5 times a week to go to rallies and protests. And I'm all like, because, as a family member in a non-high profile case, you're like, well, what about Kobe? What about Kobe? Like, I'm so sorry for George, but what about Kobe? I'm so sorry for Dante, but what about Kobe? Like, these cases come and then you're just kind of sitting there like, wait a minute. And so I felt like it was my job. Well, people don't know, and it's not going to happen magically. Then, it's my job to go out there to get people to know. So I went out there until I felt like the state of Minnesota knew. Right. And every legislator and elected official up to the attorney general, I got them all on speed dial. I got them all on speed dial now. The governor, the mayor, the mayors, the attorney generals, legislators, because, if they don't know, then what are they going to do for me? And that's very exhausting and quite honestly kind of nerve-wracking. It's scary. I'm up there speaking in front of people and I'm surrounded by folks that have bulletproof vests on and are packing. And I'm not. I'm all like, well, is it really the smartest move for me to be making? So for multiple reasons, mainly because I don't actually live down there and I couldn't afford to keep on going down there. I kind of turned inward and started doing what I could policy work wise, and changing bills, changing policies, changing ordinances. For about the last many months, been working with Brooklyn Center. They, in May of 2021, they had adopted the Dante Wright and Kobe Heisler Community Safety and Violence Prevention Resolution, which aims to overhaul community safety in Brooklyn Center. They named myself as the chair of the community responder work group that not only deals with like the mental health calls, like you got the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon, you got the STAR program in Dallas, Texas. There's a CREW program somewhere. So kind of setting up a program for Brooklyn Center like that, but it's not just mental health / autism related things. When you're looking at it to do a full overhaul, we're also talking about animal complaints and noise complaints and, a whole host of lower level calls. And keep in mind, this isn't just safety wise, just for people who aren't as empathetic. It's also fiscally responsible. Most of the officers in my son's case were making upwards of $100,000. When we took a sampling of the actual calls from Brooklyn Center that we took actual samplings, and I tried to make it through the meeting, and I was almost laughing through the meeting at how ludicrous it was that we're paying people $100,000 a year to respond to calls like some of these calls. Not my son's call in particular, but like gentleman in a wheelchair lost. Well, you don't need officers to respond to that. Sister in room smoking weed won't open her door. I don't even think you need armed officers to respond to that. There's just multiple better responders, more appropriate responders, but also more fiscally responsible responders. We pay officers a lot of money. And so dealing with that part, and then like I spoke to you before this interview, the Dante Wright portion deals with the low-level non-moving violations. So things like if your headlight is out or your tags are expired, stuff like that, you're not going to have a bunch of multiple armed officers responding to that situation. You will either have a different type of responder or some cite and release is something they're supposed to be doing, but they aren't. Also connecting that with things like in Minnesota, I don't know if it's a Brooklyn Center thing or a Minnesota thing, or I think it's a Minnesota thing, Lights On Minnesota. So say you get, whoever this new group is pulls you over because you have your headlight out. Well, they're also then going to give you the information to connect you with the organization that can help you get your headlight fixed. Because let's be real, sometimes like my my mother isn't driving around with no tags because she's a well-established, financially secure person. All right. There's lots of people that aren't quite there yet for whatever reason. But because you can't afford to put tags on your car and you drive anyhow, are you really a criminal? Do we really want to be vilifying people like that? Because it's a bigger issue. Housing, education, access to healthcare, all that stuff. We have to look at that also when we're looking at community safety and overhauling some of the stuff is what are the real root problems, right? Because when you read comments and some of this stuff, well, if you don't have this, then you shouldn't be driving. Well, you know what? If life was just that easy, what do you want them to do? Not work because they can't afford it and then have to go to the county to get assistance. And then you're going to complain then. They're in a no-win situation as far as what some people see them as. Just let them figure it out, right? But it's kind of overwhelming to be Katie and I as a result of what happened to our children to be at the forefront of this change in Brooklyn Center. But we've been working really hard on that and spending a lot of time on it.
All right. Well, Thank you so much for providing us that information. It's really helpful, to be honest. And I'm really glad that somebody's stepping up. You know, when our legal system is broken, we need individuals to change that system. And it seems like the way that you've been speaking today, you've done a lot of amazing work and are still moving things around, moving it forward. And so I commend you for that. One last question I wanted to ask you before we conclude this interview is there a message that you would like to leave for others to listen to understand, to any message that you would like to, please do so now.
Well, sure. I think, well, first off, to all those naysayers who got opinions in these police murder cases and just make those flippant, hurtful comments, don't, because you would be feeling differently if it had happened to your kid. And if after I say that to you and you still have that attitude, then I wish with all my heart and soul that the police murder your fucking child, and then maybe you'll understand what we're going through. So for all those people out there talking like that and being so flippant and unempathetic, they can all just screw right off and get struck by lightning for all I care. Them, their loved ones, their children, their pets, everybody. Their relatives that are already dead. Let's kill them again, because I'm sick of being so disrespected when what happened to my child should not have happened to my child. But on a more pleasant note, it's really important. What I'm saying is really the most important thing that we can do at this point. Yeah, standing on the street and rallying, that's great, brings attention. Quite often that brings an immediate response to something like, Dante Wright getting murdered, and we want to see the videos right away. Well, community is going to burn your city down if you don't show us the videos. Stuff like that is very effective for an immediate response that you need. But really, as far as this long-term overhaul of getting each city and each state to make public safety more equitable, because clearly we know there's racial disparities, and we won't even get into those stats. If people don't believe it, then just keep on walking, right? Because it's real, it's verifiable, it happens. I'm sick of arguing with whether or not it happens. It happens. Racial profiling happens. I think really what the most important thing to do is we need to just start looking at every elected official position that is out there. And I mean, I'm talking, we need to get folks to become lawyers. We need to get folks into judgeships. We need to get folks into mayor positions, governor positions, attorney general positions, every legislative position. We need to become the senators. We need to do all of that. All of us, each and every one of us. And not me, because I'm not going to do it, because that seems like the most miserable life I could imagine, is being a politician. But you know what? That's really, every time we have a problem, like the folks in the impact, we call ourselves the impacted families, qualified immunity is our biggest obstacle. And until we can get that law changed, and we've been trying. And so guess what? If I was in there, maybe it would happen. Maybe if I was in there and you were in there and so was in there but the people in there aren't doing what's right, and I don't expect, well, no, you know what? Not only do I expect police to be held accountable for when they do wrong, I expect that they should be held to a higher standard, because we give them all the power in the world. Anybody with that, you don't get unlimited ability to, they're acting as judge, jury, and executioner. That is not their role, and they need to stop. And the community needs to stop agreeing with that. Oh, another thug down. You play dumb, you play stupid game, you win stupid prizes. Would you say that about, if that had happened to your own child? Would you be saying that? That is so rude. And I don't even care if the person was a bad, if they had things in their past. Guess what, Rodolfo? I got shit in my past too. Luckily, I didn't get caught, but none of us are angels, right? So don't act like you are somehow don't judge a person by their worst moment in their life, or one of their worst moments in their lives. My son simply had a bad day that day and was going to hurt himself, and somehow he deserved to get murdered. Like, not just like, oh, sorry, like he deserved it. He should have known better. Like, well, no, shut up. It's disgusting and absolutely unempathetic. You know, that's not how we treat people. That's not how we treat our neighbors. And just so in case anybody is, because people get all, oh, you just don't like the police. No, dude, that is what I'm trying to work for is good for the police too, right? How did we as a community ever get to the point where we have expected the police to not only respond to the violent criminals and crimes and things in process, but now they're also domestic abuse people, and they're also mental health people, and they're also housing, and they're also substance abuse. They're not all of those things, but yet us as a community have allowed the police job to get to that point. So I'm not one who's out there. I mean, right now, are police my favorite? No. But I have police in my family. I have officers that I've met since all this has happened that I know are out there doing good. And when we work with, the overhaul we're doing in Brooklyn Center, we're not just doing it ourselves. We are working with an organization called Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which includes multiple police officers, and that's kind of what they do. They're working, you know, they take these officers and they take all the different stakeholders, and then they go from city to city, state to state, to the places that want to do this, and they help you, you know, put it all together and you know, just know what steps to take. And they bring a lot of research and information already, because this is kind of their wheelhouse and what they do. So just to let people out there know, you know, just because somebody wants change in police reform does not mean we are anti-police. So I'm kind of sick of that rhetoric as I'm talking to you right now. If somebody busts into my house, who do you think I'm calling? I'm calling 911, and I expect my police officers to come and protect me, and I believe that they will, right? So that's not a problem. But, you know, if I have a child in the house who's having a mental health crisis, I want somebody else to call, not them. And the other thing people need to realize, because there's a lot of fear when you start talking about a community responder program, let's just keep in mind that if it is so bad, community responders can still call the police. It's not like the police are all of a sudden not a part of the equation. They're just not the first responders. And so I guess one of my big things also is that I would just ask for people, when your city, because it will happen, when your city does start talking about looking at revamping community safety or call it police reform if you want, don't be so scared. Like, I'm not doing this for me. I already lost my baby. I'm doing this to make sure that nobody else's child or loved one goes through this, you know, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a win-win-win, right? The police now only have to respond to the stuff that they're ultimately trained for, right? And so now they don't have to worry about being in these positions where they're expected to handle situations that they're not trained to handle. And so it should be, and then they're freed up to really focus on the more violent crimes. When they say we don't have, well, now you'll have enough time and officers to do that stuff. And then we're going to leave the more appropriate responders to the other situations. And somehow they take us wanting to do this as an affront, as an insult. I'm not insulting you. I'm telling you that we have allowed too much to be put on your plate. You talk to them individually, they'll agree with you. And so we're just getting you back to the basics, what a police officer is supposed to be and supposed to be responding to. It's not offensive. It should be a win-win-win for everybody. It's just a more logical structuring of response. You know, what the term we like to use is alternative response network, which includes police, just not in every situation. So I would just implore people to really not be so scared about some of this, and especially in the community responder part, which is what I'm chair of. There's actually plenty of cities who have done this, and you have the stats, and they've been ridiculously positive, right? What's new in Brooklyn Center is the low-level moving violation stuff. Other cities haven't really done that. I'm the chair of. We have a lot of history and stats that show that you really have absolutely no reason to be scared, actually. So please do your research before you start being really flippant and just writing it off.
All right. Well, that will conclude our interview for the day, Amity. I want to thank you once again for being here and spending time and explaining the situation and everything that's been going on. And like I said, hopefully you'll be able to hear this and see it as soon as possible as we're able to get it up there on YouTube. And that will conclude the interview for now. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much.